Cougar kept the switchback shade the way a shadow kept a corner, quietly, without movement, but with the kind of presence that made the whole trail feel like it had turned its volume down. The switchbacks above Juniper Knoll were steep enough to make people regret their lunch choices. The path cut up the hillside in tight zigzags, each turn tucked under rock outcrops and clusters of scrub oak. In the afternoon, those turns held shade-like pockets, cool, dim places where sweat dried slower and your breathing sounded louder than you liked. Most hikers loved the shade. They paused there, leaned on trekking poles, checked phones, laughed at how this better be worth it. That was exactly why Ranger Elise Warren disliked the lower switchbacks after noon. Not because of hikers, because of what hikers didn't notice. Elise had worked Juniper Knoll for 6 seasons. She knew every unofficial shortcut people carved, every spot where water pooled after storms, every boulder kids climbed and then got scared coming down from. She also knew the wildlife patterns. Deer feeding in the early morning, coyotes cutting across the fire road at dusk, the occasional bobcat slipping through chaparral like smoke, and once or twice a season, a cougar. Most days, cougars stayed out of sight. That was their entire strategy. Avoid humans, move at dawn, hunt quietly, disappear. The only time people saw one was when luck, or bad timing, put them on the same narrow line of trail. Elise's job wasn't to scare hikers with ghost stories. It was to keep them informed enough to behave smartly without turning the mountain into a panic festival. So when a volunteer trail steward named Mark texted her at 1:07 p.m. with a single message, "Big cat seen resting in shade at Switchback 4, not moving," Elise didn't gasp. She just got up fast. Switchback 4 sat in a little shaded notch where the trail turned sharply around a boulder and a stand of oak. It was a natural choke point. Hikers came around the bend suddenly, close to whatever was on the inside corner. If something big was resting there, people could stumble into it at arm's length. Elise grabbed her radio, her small emergency kit, and the bright orange temporary trail hold sign from the ranger station wall. She jogged to the lower trailhead, boots thudding on dirt, mind already running through the checklist. Keep distance, keep people calm, prevent crowding, get eyes on the animal, decide whether to close the trail. She reached Switchback 2 and started hearing hikers, voices bouncing off rock, laughter, the casual loudness of people who assumed the hillside belonged to them. Elise raised her voice gently. "Hey folks," she called, stepping to the side of the trail where she could be seen. "Quick heads up, please keep your voices low up ahead. We have wildlife resting near Switchback 4. Most people slowed instinctively when a ranger spoke. Some looked excited, a few looked worried. Elise kept her tone steady and neutral, because tone mattered. If she sounded alarmed, they'd panic. If she sounded too casual, they'd treat it like entertainment. A couple in bright athletic gear asked, "What kind of wildlife?" Elise didn't lie, but she also didn't say cougar like she was announcing a celebrity. "A large cat," she said. "We're giving it space. Please stay close to the outside edge of the trail and move through quietly." The man blinked. "Like a mountain lion?" he asked. Elise nodded. "Yes," she said. "It's resting. We're going to keep everyone calm and moving, or hold the trail if needed." The woman's eyes widened. "Is it dangerous?" Elise answered honestly. "Any wild predator can be dangerous if surprised or crowded," she said. "But if we keep distance and don't act like prey, no running, no screaming, it will likely move off on its own." The couple nodded, suddenly serious, and continued upward with their chatter switched off like someone had pulled a plug. Elise reached Switchback 3 and spotted Mark, the volunteer, standing with 2 other hikers. Mark was tall, sunburned, and always carried a small pair of binoculars like he wanted to be useful. He met Elise's eyes and pointed, not toward the animal, but toward the next bend. "Inside corner," he said quietly, "right in the shade pocket. It's been there 20 minutes. Elise nodded. "Anyone get too close?" she asked. 2 people came around loud, Mark said. I waved them back. Cat didn't bolt, just watched. Elise felt that detail settle in her chest. A cougar that didn't immediately leave when humans were near wasn't necessarily aggressive, but it was comfortable, and comfort could be unpredictable if people pushed it. She motioned Mark closer. "You did good," she said. "Stay here and keep folks from bunching at the bend. No photos, crowd." Mark nodded. "Got it." Elise advanced alone towards Switchback 4, moving the way she taught people to move. Steady, not sneaking, not loud. She wanted the cougar to hear her coming so it wouldn't be startled by sudden appearance. Surprises were the enemy. She rounded the corner slowly, staying on the outside edge of the switchback. And there it was. In the shade under the oak, just off the inside line, a cougar lay stretched along the cool dirt like it had melted into it. Tawny coat, thick tail curled slightly, ears up. Its head was lifted, and its eyes, pale, focused, watched Elise with a calm that made her skin tighten. It didn't snarl, it didn't flatten its ears. It simply looked at her like she was part of the landscape now. Elise stopped at a safe distance, far enough that she wasn't in too close territory, close enough to assess. She spoke softly, more for herself and for any hikers within earshot than for the cat. "Okay," she murmured. "You're resting." The cougar blinked once, slow. Then it shifted one paw slightly, claws not visible, body still relaxed. Elise took in the surroundings. The shade pocket was deep. The heat outside it was harsh. The cougar had chosen the coolest, most hidden place on the switchbacks, exactly where hikers funneled through. It was a bad overlap. Elise backed up a few steps without turning her back fully, then raised her radio and spoke quietly. "This is Warren," she said. "Confirmed cougar resting at switchback 4 inside corner shade. Holding position. Recommend temporary trail hold at switchback 3, reroute or pause hikers until animal moves." The radio crackled with response. "Copy," came the voice of her supervisor. "Any aggressive behavior?" "None," Elise replied. "Alert but calm, not leaving." "Copy. Deploy second ranger to assist," the supervisor said. "Use signage. Keep people calm." Elise lowered the radio and glanced back down the trail. She could hear hikers approaching, footsteps, a murmur of voices that had already dropped in volume. Good. She stepped back to switchback 3, where Mark was starting to manage a small line of hikers like a patient usher. Elise raised her hand. "We're going to pause here for a few minutes," she said clearly. "Cougar is resting around the bend. We're giving it time to move. Please stay together, speak quietly, and keep kids close." A dad with 2 kids nodded immediately and pulled his children nearer. A teenager stopped recording and shoved his phone into his pocket, suddenly aware of how stupid it felt to treat this like a clip. A woman whispered, "How close is it?" Elise held her palm out flat. "Close enough that you could surprise it if you turn the corner fast," she said. "That's why we're pausing. Quiet is safer, for you and for the animal." People listened. Not perfectly, there was always someone who wanted to peek, but the general energy shifted. Conversations turned into whispers. Footsteps became slower. The whole group began to mirror Elise's calm because humans copied tone as much as they copied rules. For 10 minutes, they waited. It felt longer because waiting in nature with a known predator nearby stretched time. Elise used the time to watch behaviors. Who was restless? Who was respectful? Who was trying to creep forward for a look? When one man started edging towards switchback 4 with his phone raised, Elise stepped in front of him without touching him. "No," she said softly, firm as a locked door. "We don't crowd wildlife." The man blinked, embarrassed. He stepped back. Another hiker asked, "Why doesn't it just leave?" Elise answered, "It's hot and that shade is valuable," she said. "Animals choose rest spots the way we choose benches. If we give it space, it will move when it's ready." A few minutes later, a second ranger arrived from above, coming down the trail. He was younger, named Dev, with a calm face and a bright safety vest. He nodded to Elise and whispered, Seen? Still resting, Elise whispered back. We're holding this group. Dev stood at the next switchback above, effectively boxing the area so nobody wandered into the Cougar from either direction. The trail had become quiet enough that Elise could hear small things again. Wind in leaves, a distant jay, the scrape of a boot adjusting on rock. The hush wasn't fear exactly, it was respect mixed with awareness. Then Mark lifted his binoculars and whispered, "It's moving." Elise's heart gave a small jump. She stepped forward just enough to see around the bend without exposing herself too far. The Cougar had risen. It stretched once, long, fluid, powerful. It looked bigger standing than it had lying down. Then it stepped into the brush, moving uphill through the scrub oak with a smoothness that made it seem like the hillside itself had opened to accept it. No dramatic dash, no panic, just departure. Within seconds, it vanished into shade and leaves, leaving only the memory of its eyes and the flattened resting spot on the dirt. Elise waited a full minute anyway, listening, making sure it was truly gone and not just tucked behind the first bush. Then she turned back to the hikers. "All right," she said, voice still calm. It moved off. "We're going to pass through in small groups. Stay together, keep voices low for the next few switchbacks, and keep kids close." People nodded, suddenly obedient in a way that made Elise wish they were always that considerate, Cougar or no Cougar. They started moving again, and the change was immediate. No loud jokes, no shouting to friends up the trail, no music. Just quiet footfalls and occasional whispers. Even after the Cougar was gone, the hikers kept their voices down, as if the mountain had taught them a brief lesson in manners. Cougar kept the switchback shade because shade was valuable, and the bend was a hidden pocket in the heat, and the hikers lowered voices because, for once, they felt the simple truth under every trail rule. In a wild place, you don't have to see danger to respect it. Sometimes you respect it because you know you're sharing the path with something that doesn't need to announce itself. The quiet didn't vanish when the Cougar vanished. That was what surprised Elise most. Usually, once the incident passed, people snapped back into their normal trail personalities, laughing, talking loud, calling down to friends, letting kids sprint ahead like the mountain was a playground again. But this group moved as if the switchbacks had been rewired. Their shoulders stayed a little tighter, their footsteps stayed measured. Even the teenagers kept their phones lower, like filming suddenly felt less important than paying attention. Elise walked behind the last cluster for a while, not as a guard, more as a steady presence. She didn't want anyone to feel watched like a child, she wanted them to feel guided. At Switchback 5, the trail opened briefly into sun, and everyone paused in the brighter air as if stepping out of a theatre. The heat hit them again. Someone exhaled dramatically. A woman laughed, quietly, at how intense 10 minutes of waiting could feel. A man in a floppy hat turned to Elise and said, "Do you see them often?" Elise answered honestly. "Not often," she said, "but often enough that we plan for it." "Is this their territory?" he asked, lowering his voice like the Cougar could hear the word. Elise nodded. "They travel through here," she said. "They hunt deer on these slopes. This is part of their map." The man looked uphill at the scrub oak and rock and suddenly seemed to see it differently, not as scenery, but as cover. They continued upward. Elise expected the second ranger, Dev, to radio that he'd seen the Cougar move farther away, but the radio stayed quiet. That too was normal. Cougars didn't keep performing once they chose to leave. They disappeared because disappearing was the point. But Elise also knew something most hikers didn't. A cougar leaving the trail didn't mean it left the area, it meant it changed position. It could be 100 meters away, watching, or it could have moved into deeper brush, or it could have climbed higher to a ledge and waited for the trail to clear. You couldn't assume absence. You could only assume distance. That was why she kept the hikers moving in small clusters instead of one long string. At Switchback 7, a small family stopped to drink water. The dad, early 40s, calm face, kept his two kids close. The younger one, maybe 7, whispered, "Is it going to come back?" Elise crouched to his height. "Probably not to the trail," she said gently. "It wants quiet. That's why we stay together and stay calm." The kid nodded like this was a fair exchange. We behave, it stays away. The older kid, a girl with a ponytail and a serious expression, asked, "Were we in danger?" Elise didn't sugarcoat, but she didn't dramatize. "We were in a situation that could become dangerous if people surprised it," she said. "That's why we paused and gave it space. You did the right thing by staying close." The girl's shoulders lifted in pride. The dad gave Elise a grateful look that said, "Thank you for not terrifying them." As they climbed, Elise noticed another subtle shift. People started looking at the trail edges more. Not paranoid scanning, just awareness. They noticed deer tracks. They noticed where the brush was thickest. They noticed how the inside of each switchback hid what was around the bend. It was like the cougar had given them a short lesson in reading terrain. Halfway up, Dev met Elise where the trail crossed a narrow rock shelf. He kept his voice low. "No sign now," he said. "But I saw where it went, up into the oak pocket. It's likely bedded again somewhere cooler." Elise nodded. "Any hikers from above?" she asked. "2 groups came down," Dev said. "I held them until it moved off. They were decent." Elise exhaled softly. "Good," she said. "Thanks for covering." Dev glanced at the hikers moving past, still quiet. "They're being unusually respectful," he observed. Elise's mouth twitched. "Fear does that," she said. Dev shook his head. "Not fear," he replied. "Awareness." Elise paused, considering the difference. Dev was right. This wasn't panic. It was that rare state where people accepted they weren't the only ones using the mountain. They walked together for a few minutes, monitoring both directions. Elise kept her eyes on the shaded pockets now, not because she expected the cougar to leap out, but because she wanted to spot anything that might make hikers stop and bunch again. And then she saw the most common problem after a wildlife hold: the return of curiosity. A group of 4 hikers, young adults with bright packs, had slowed near a shaded bend. One pointed to the ground and whispered excitedly. Another raised a phone. Elise approached and saw what they'd found. Tracks. Not crisp paw prints. The soil was too dry for perfect impressions. But there were clear signs: a scuff in dust, a pressed patch where something heavy had lay, a faint drag mark where a tail had shifted. Cougar evidence. The hikers were treating it like a museum exhibit. "Look," one whispered, "you can see where it sat." Elise stepped in calmly. "You can," she said, "and now you can keep moving." One of them looked up, half embarrassed. "We just wanted a picture," he said. Elise nodded. "I understand," she said, "but stopping here creates a cluster. Clusters make noise and confusion. If the cougar is still in the area, and it likely is, we don't want to encourage it to watch a crowd." The hikers lowered their phones. One nodded. "Okay," she said, and they moved on. Elise watched them go and felt that familiar mix of relief and frustration. People didn't mean harm. They just forgot that wildlife wasn't a spectacle. It was a set of needs moving through a landscape. At the overlook near the top of Juniper Knoll, the trail widened into a flat rock platform with a view that made everyone stop. The valley stretched out with patchwork fields, the river shining in a thin silver line. Wind was stronger up here, and it carried voices away instead of bouncing them off rock. People finally started talking at normal volume again, still not shouting, but no longer whispering. The tension loosened. Elise stood at the edge and looked down the switchbacks. From up here, the shaded pockets were invisible. The trail looked harmless. That was the trick of landscapes. Danger and beauty often lived in the same fold. As the hikers took photos and ate snacks, Elise walked to a small interpretive sign about local wildlife. It had a picture of a cougar, the usual safety reminders: "Don't run, stay together, make yourself big, report sightings." It was always there. Most people barely glanced at it. Today, a couple stood reading it, word for word. The woman turned to Elise and said, "We've hiked here so many times and never thought about this." Elise nodded. "Most days you don't have to," she said. "But it's always part of the place." The woman looked out at the scrub and said softly, "It felt like we were guests." Elise smiled faintly. "You are," she replied. On the descent, the trail stayed calm. People kept kids close at bends. They called out, "Coming down," at tight corners without being told. They didn't blast music, they didn't sprint. By the time Elise returned to the ranger station, the day had shifted into late afternoon, and the switchback shade was deeper again. She filled out her incident report, not dramatic language, just facts. Cougar resting, trail hold, animal moved off, hikers complied, no injuries, no escalation. Before she filed it, she paused and wrote one extra note for herself under observations. Hiker behavior improved significantly after hold. Voices lowered, movement steadier, awareness increased. It wasn't just about safety, it was about culture, how a shared moment could briefly reset the relationship between humans and the trail. Cougar kept the switchback shade because it was cool and hidden in the heat, and the hikers lowered voices not only because a ranger told them to, but because the mountain, for a while, reminded them of something easy to forget. Quiet isn't just polite in wild places. Quiet is part of staying welcome.